and welcome to my review of the Doctor Who 2017 Christmas special, Twice Upon a Time, written by Steven Moffat, directed by Rachel Talalay, and being the very last episode to feature Peter Capaldi as the 12th Doctor. So, I had a very odd reaction to Twice Upon a Time when I initially watched it. I thought it was okay. I wasn't particularly impressed with it, but it's only really over time as I've sort of thought about the episode, and I wrote a review first to try and sort of put my thoughts down and understand what I really thought of it, because such an episode like this is to a certain extent overwhelming. You have a lot of mixed feelings about it, and it's just one of those episodes that I think you need time to think over before you make an immediate response. And what I came to the conclusion was that I just didn't really enjoy the episode that much. It just didn't really do much for me, and I don't think it did much as an episode. It was a very hollow episode. It was sort of a virtually plotless episode with no real sort of strong defining character arcs. And what could have been a fun adventure felt meaningless. There wasn't really an adventure to it, there wasn't really a threat, and there wasn't necessarily anything going for it. It didn't really develop any particular aspects of its story to a particularly great extent. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that Twice Upon a Time isn't a terrible episode, but it's not a good episode. It left me feeling quite cold by the end of it, and I think if it wasn't for the little tease at the end for a new era of Doctor Who, which all seems very, very exciting, I don't know if I don't know really how I'd reflect on it. It's odd. I was really interested to see what they do with the first and 12th Doctor's meeting, but that was left to banter, and the first Doctor was not so much mischaracterised, but he was sort of put across as, oh, it's this old sort of 60s Doctor, which, while I can understand what the intention of that was, I don't think the first Doctor necessarily had a particular role in the story. I don't think he explored anything with the 12th Doctor or as his own incarnation. I think essentially what he added was a little bit of banter, and that was it. I feel like a story such as this would have worked better with Matt Smith, maybe because it's slightly more of a contrast. Peter Capaldi is this older, grumpier Doctor, and so's the first Doctor to a certain extent. It's not so much that they're too similar, it's just that there's not really much you can do putting the two together. It's a really nice idea, but it's one that I don't think was explored to a great extent. Maybe if this episode was written by someone else who had a real interest in seeing these two Doctors meet, perhaps we could have got something much more interesting, much more developed. But as it happened, the first Doctor was there for the bants, so to speak, and that was quite disappointing if you're a first Doctor fan. I also think that the whole previously segment at the beginning, and I do go into this in a bit more detail in my review, was a terrible way to start the episode. It was a lovely little sequence, don't get me wrong. It's the sort of thing where if there was an alternate cut of this episode for fans on the DVD, it'd be a wonderful inclusion, and I hope we get to see more of those sort of specially filmed segments from the 10th Planet. But, well, I think it just confused the majority of the audience. It's a previously for an episode that you can't really watch in full, apart from, you know, an animated reconstruction. It's odd. I think fan service like that that's so on the nose is just disorientating, especially if you're someone who isn't a hardcore Doctor Who fan, and sitting down to watch what should in theory be a standalone episode of Doctor Who on Christmas Day, and being confronted with this previously from 709 episodes ago just seems a bit much. Steven Moffat doesn't seem to be very good at establishing his own Doctor Who, and there's a lot of references to the past to try and appease fans who perhaps are quite happy to overlook certain narrative problems if, oh look, it's the first Doctor's TARDIS, oh look, it's stuff from the 10th Planet. Saying that, I do think the whole transition of clips from the 10th planet going into sort of full HD widescreen footage for Twice Upon a Time was a lovely idea, and it works very, very well for the regeneration at the end for the First Doctor. It's just that maybe they shouldn't have done the little previously segment. Maybe they should have found another way of introducing the First Doctor into the episode. I do think that Twice Upon a Time had a variety of structural problems. The episode takes an incredibly long time to get going, and it takes something like 20 minutes to get from what is essentially the end of the story, as the soldiers have the Christmas Day armistice, to the 12th Doctor actually regenerating into the 13th Doctor. It's 20 minutes of padding. Essentially, the middle of the episode results to nothing. There's no real story driving forward, there's no real character arcs that reach some kind of climax, and there's no threat that needs to be faced. It ultimately comes across as a big exposition dump. In fact, the whole episode, when you really think about it, is just a talkie piece about the Doctor, about the Captain, about the First World War, and the three are sort of tied together in what should be a really nice sort of thematic arc for the episode, but because there isn't really a sense of structure to the whole piece, it doesn't really flow very well. It's not so much that it fails, as much as it just doesn't really succeed entirely. I think it just feels so underdeveloped and, again, hollow, that I can't really invest in that sort of thing. Maybe some people really, really got into this episode, but I couldn't. I felt like it was all half-baked ideas, stuff that never really went anywhere. Rusty the Dalek appears, and I didn't really care at all. It was just, oh, right, okay, we're doing this, I guess. Bill's return also felt incredibly disappointing. I wasn't really against bringing back Pearl Mackie as the character, because I was quite happy to see more of Bill. Granted, her story had ended, but hey, this is the immediate next episode. What could possibly go wrong? See Hellbent for reference. Bill isn't technically in this episode. It's a glass facade of Bill, except the episode also tries to have it that it is Bill because it's got her memories and it's got a personality because of that. But at the same time, the episode wants us to know that this isn't Bill. It's both Bill and not Bill at the same time, which creates a real sense of confusion as an audience member. Should we care about this Bill? This isn't a real Bill. The real Bill, by default, is dead, so should we really invest in this storyline? And Steven Moffat tries to make her Bill, but every time he manages to make her Bill, he also manages to remind us by having the Doctor say, of course you're not Bill. And we're just left in the dark, not really knowing how to feel. This is both Bill and not Bill, and Steven Moffat tries to have his cake and eat it, and actually can't really achieve that. It just doesn't quite work somehow. When Nardole appears towards the end of the episode, it's a really lovely moment. The 12th Doctor's got his main Series 10 trio back together again, but it's not really Nardole. Nardole's dead. So the 12th Doctor's goodbye to his two main companions is, well, it's not really a goodbye, it's just the 12th Doctor talking at them, at facades of them. They'll never know what he said, and that's not really tragic at all, it's just odd. That we've already said goodbye to the 12th Doctor in The Doctor Falls, and we've already said goodbye to Nardole and to Bill, and also to Clara, who reappears in this episode through the magic of terrible green screen. Looking very, very odd. I think it was the worst kept secret ever that Jenna Coleman would be returning in the episode, and what could have been a really lovely moment was wasted on... I don't think she's there. What? That does not look right. And of course the fact that it isn't really Clara. We've already said goodbye to Clara multiple times, and yet Steven Moffat tries to get in this one last goodbye, and it doesn't really mean anything because Clara's just randomly turned up, and the Doctor in theory shouldn't remember her, but because the Glass people have brought his memory back for the sake of convenience ultimately, it means that he can recognise her, and he can say goodbye to her, which could have been a really poignant moment if Clara was, I don't know, an actual character in the episode, and if it was actually Clara. In fact, you know what, regardless, you could have done something out of the fact that the Doctor's been missing Clara, but not really knowing that because he's forgotten about her since the events of Hellbent. But that's not really something that's been tackled before. It's something briefly referenced towards the end of the pilot, but otherwise the Doctor has completely forgotten everything about Clara, from the Husbands of Riversong right through to the Doctor Falls. It's kind of bizarre. It doesn't really work, if you understand what I mean. And it also, when it gets to the 12th Doctor's regeneration, we've already seen him die. That's the tragedy, ultimately, when it comes to the regeneration stories. It's not always necessarily about the regeneration sequence itself, but what actually happens to the Doctor, saying goodbye to this version of the Doctor. And we've already seen him basically regenerate at the end of The Doctor Falls. The only thing we were missing was the actual transformation into Jodie Whittaker. Here we get that, but before then we have 10-15 minutes of Capaldi saying goodbye to everything he's already said goodbye to in the show. It's not so much that it's a terrible sequence, it's just that it doesn't really have any kind of poignancy because it's repetitious. And repetition, when it comes to these big, swelling emotional scenes like this, just detracts from the emotional response. I couldn't really invest or feel anything in Capaldi's eventual regeneration because by that point the episode had been dragging for so long and I already said goodbye to all of these characters multiple times that I just couldn't really invest in it anymore. That's not to say I don't like the 12th Doctor or his era at all, but I'd already felt that it ended in The Doctor Falls, which was a surprisingly emotional episode. I think that is Capaldi's defining final episode, and this comes across as this awkward epilogue. I just couldn't get into it, and the fact that I couldn't get into it was incredibly disappointing. Again though, I want to reiterate that this episode isn't bad at all, it's just not really good. I couldn't find anything that I really loved about it. Murray Gold did a nice score, but some of it had these really odd reprisals that didn't quite fit. The cinematography and direction from Rachel Talalay was lovely when she got a chance to shine, but so much of the episode was just characters talking to each other and not really giving Talalay much to work with, that her efforts just felt underutilised really. When she gets the chance to show off, she really does. There's some wonderful shots in the episode and some wonderful little scenes, but Steven Moffat's script just sits down and explains everything instead of letting Rachel Talalay explain the story through her direction, as he allowed her to do in Heaven Sent. It's irritating really. Some scenes are just explained to us through the dialogue, when really I think Rachel Talalay is such an accomplished director that she could just show us this stuff very quickly, but in such a way that it conveys the most amount of emotional impact, or it really conveys the meaning of the scene or the shot. Instead, we've got to have Mark Gatiss's World War I captain explain how he's feeling, explain the situation that he's in as he's facing off against the German soldier in the trenches, instead of the First Doctor realising through some kind of visual realisation that the 12th Doctor is this hero and that's the man he's got to become. Bill, or the glass avatar of Bill, has to sit down and explain it to him, and in doing so explain to the Doctor that he's the most important person in the universe, even though the whole point of the Doctor is that he doesn't know that he's the most important person in the universe. You kind of see my problem with the episode. It doesn't really work. They're all half-baked, underdeveloped ideas. It doesn't really flow together as one standalone piece. It's sort of this awkward epilogue that epitomises the faults within Moffat's writing. Again, it's not a terrible episode, it's just underdeveloped. I can't find anything to particularly like, but vice versa, I can't find anything to particularly dislike. It just didn't really do anything for me. If I was to give this episode a score, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. It just didn't really do much for me. And I'm sorry if you're someone who's a very big fan of Peter Capaldi's Doctor and of Steven Moffat's era, if you think that this review's too negative. I've really enjoyed aspects of this era. I think Peter Capaldi's a fantastic Doctor, and I think Steven Moffat has written some lovely scripts. He's also written, Hellbent. I didn't really want the 12th Doctor era to end like this. I wanted it to end with The Doctor Falls, and the fact that it didn't disappoints me even more. It's not that it started off badly, it's just ended off in a bit of a disappointing and underwhelming way. Looking to the future though, we do have Series 11, we have Chris Chibnall taking over, we have Jodie Whittaker as the new Doctor with her new companions. It seems very exciting, and I look forward to seeing all of the little details come out over the next few months, even if it's going to be a very, very long time until we actually get to see this new series. I wasn't sure whether to review this episode, because it is quite difficult to talk about. There's just so much going on, and there's so much to really to think about. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments section below. I'd love to have a discussion with you, especially if you love this episode. I'd really like to know what worked for you, because the episode clearly didn't work for me, and I'd be interested in discussing that with you. For now though, I think this is going to be my last Doctor Who review, at least for a while. Yeah. Thank you for watching this review, and a Merry Christmas, slightly belated Christmas, and a Happy New Year to everyone. And I'll see you all next time.